Okay. This is the first part for our teacher advisors for our professional development 2 for this school year. This section is we are going to be doing a professional development on invention education. And a little bit about this segment is the segment, or what we're going to be going over today, is a summary, kind of taking some highlights over a larger professional development that was held this last summer. The training this summer was hosted by Oregon Mesa. So a big disclaimer is that a lot of the origination of a lot of these materials are on loan from Oregon Mesa. And so we're just modifying them for use for our upcoming Mesa Day and Mesa USA competitions. Later on in the training, like the next session, we'll be going over in depth the different handbooks and the different competitions. I don't know if you all have had a chance to look at them or not, but in generally both of our competitions, both Mesa Day and Mesa USA, have some sort of prepared component, prototype building, where we will need to, students will be designing and inventing and creating prototypes for use. So that is where this training will help prepare for those different events. Okay. I already kind of just gave that disclaimer there, but again, just giving proper credit to all who originated a lot of the documents here. And then in the bigger picture, this framework was provided by the Lemelson Foundation, which they do a lot of invention education. So I will be sharing some of the resources later. So if you are Googling or happen to come across things, invention education, invent ed, different terms, this is the toolkit that we'll be sharing, has a lot of framework that are tied into there. This framework was developed with part of the core belief about Mesa programs, about how Mesa programs work, and how this toolkit fits into all of that. So again, providing this resource is, with the foundation that our program about, how our Mesa programs operate, trying to provide as much resources as possible for our Mesa programs. And then again, just one last little disclaimer slide, just to use within the Mesa framework, and note not distribution of any of the curriculum that we're using that we're sharing with different school districts or whatnot. Okay, and that's the last of the disclaimers. But the purpose for today is to understand the methodology behind the toolkit, how you can use it in your classroom, in your New Mexico Mesa classroom, and how it can help prepare you for competition. And a good chunk of our time today is we are actually going to be practicing the human-centered design. We'll be breaking up into groups, and we are going to be designing and prototyping amongst our group here with us. So we are actually going to be practicing this to be able to put those methods into action with the students. Okay. So before I go on, I want to share some, and actually I'm going to stop this screen here. I'm going to stop the share screen of the PowerPoint slide. And what I am going to share you guys is where some of these resources are at. So as I'm talking about them, and if we need to pull up anything throughout the session, you guys know where to find them.
Anita, there's no PowerPoint showing on our end.
No, I stopped it on purpose. I was changing the screen out.
Yeah. There wasn't a PowerPoint ever.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll go back and I'll share that here in a bit. Sorry about that. It was just the disclaimers. I'll go and quickly go through them. Then let me go here. Okay. Where I'm sharing now is our New Mexico Mesa webpage. And if you guys know, I did on our webpage, if you've already completed the agreement link, you would have already gotten a password. I'm not able to give out passwords now while I'm actually presenting, but I can do it after this session. But if you have that same password, it gives you access to all of our different curriculum, including here, I did upload the Invention Education Toolkit. And essentially what you would get when you do that is you are going to get, pop it up. A document that looks like this. And this is basically the resources list from, what we use this summer. So you'll have access to the different designs, and in particular, the curriculum that we're going to be referencing is right here in this Invention Toolkit open resource. So that's how you access it when you want to. Other documents that you are going to need to access as we go forward is on this same page. Well, actually, no, not on this page. Let me go ahead and stop the share here. Some documents that we are going to be working with are, so I'm going to give some time here to go ahead and open some of these up on your end, as we are going to be doing a virtual design workbook. So I'm going to go ahead and put the link. If you have access to Google Docs, you can go ahead and open it. It's going to ask you to make a copy. This is going to be something we're going to be using here. And then I do believe I did. Oh, okay. And I did also post it. I just didn't see it when I first shared my screen. So also on our Mesa webpage here, you have to have the password to access the curriculum, but there is a virtual design workbook with fillable tables right here. Let me go ahead and draw on this right here. You can go ahead and click on that without a password, and it'll pull up a PowerPoint. So whether you have PowerPoint or whether you have if you want to work on PowerPoint on your computer, or if you want to work on Google Docs, I did put up the link in the chat box. We are going to be using that notebook. So if you want to take a few minutes to pull that up. When you open it up, the notebook should be just something like this. And for now, just keep it off to the side, but that it should look something like this. Okay.
Oh, I can't see your screen, Anita, if you're sharing what, there it is.
Okay, no, I just took it off. I was replacing it. This is the PowerPoint I should have been sharing since the beginning. And so, here are just those few disclaimer slides about, who helped create this document, a little bit about our core programming within Mesa, and then the final disclaimer about, ownership of the actual curriculum that we're having access to. Okay. So now we're back on track. So what are we going to be doing today is we are going to be discussing human-centered design. And if you've been with Mesa, if you've worked on whether even our Mesa Day as of last year or Mesa USA projects, human-centered design hopefully isn't a concept that is brand new to you, but it's something that we are going to go a little bit more in depth on today and actually work through some steps to design. So there are some differences when you're within Invention education. There are, a couple different varieties of projects that you can build. And even last year when we got some of the items submitted, it's a fine line dividing them, is whether you're designing a solution for a person or for a client, or whether you're just designing a product for some other type of need. So there's a couple of examples here. Building a solar light for someone on a camping trip, just generally, like if you're building a product for a store, or if you're actually solving a problem for a person. So like, for instance, creating a device that allows a child to use the bathroom, or a specific person that may have a specific need. So those are the two differences between just building a product, Invention education, and just human-centered design. Oh, let me have a lot of these. Okay. And there's different whys with both of these. Our theme in general for Mesa Day this year is celebrating invention. So we are going to go into both of these types of invention and both of these types of creation. So they are both important. They're just for different ways. Invention, you're giving students to solve problems. You're letting them use their creativity. You're allowing them to free flow and create designs. And long-term, it does provide students with really important skills, having them create their own business, create their own prototypes. It's a skill that will last them, throughout the rest of their educational career and also hopefully into their career path. The reasoning for human-centered design is it is actually based off of a real client. And this is where it gets a little bit lost, is oftentimes when we see projects, You know, students create projects, they are theoretical in nature. You know, by it being human-centered design by nature is there is that interviewing a client process, or there is that designing for a specific need for a specific person. And this may make products that are not necessarily marketable to an entire market, but they are to that specific person or that specific need about who or what you are designing for. Okay. This is some advantages of human-centered design. And so throughout this training, we will reference this little graphic here, this invention process. And in that page that I showed you, that curriculum page, it's down at the bottom. This is available for you if you want to download it, print it, you know, use it in your Mesa time. It's a poster that was created. It's nothing super revolutionary, but it does organize the ideas very well about how we're going to be going through the steps of invention education. So some advantages to human-centered design is that it's a collaborative approach to problem solving, meaning both events that we'll be using for our competitions and just in general, it's a teamwork approach. You do need to use lots of different people to make this work. At minimum, you need a client, and then at minimum, you need a designer. So you have to work together to create a project. It's not just one person's idea about what a client needs. It really needs to be a collaborative approach. And it is a process that really takes into account the needs of that user, the specific needs of that user. It is based on empathy, it's based on feedback, but then you also are using the scientific and the engineering process when you are designing for this prototype. I'm just gonna go, oh, I thought they were all up at one time. So when you're going through the invent process or the invention process, there are some key things that are part of a Mesa program that do relate into all these different steps. And so a lot of these steps here, again, I mentioned the engineering design process, depending upon what graphic you're looking at, depending upon what steps you have worked through to prototype, to create items. These are very similar steps. They just may be organized a little bit differently. So throughout this process, while we're designing, we're going to be asking questions and we're going to be defining problems. So we'll be asking questions at the start of our process when we're meeting with our client, and also when we're getting client feedback, we'll be asking those questions and defining those problems. I say we, as in like this is also your students, but while we are going through this today, we're going to be conducting investigations. So when we are prototyping, when we are putting our ideas to life, we're conducting investigations. We will be making models. In this exercise today, it won't be the actual full deal, but during your Mesa time, you will be actually creating prototypes, real life prototypes, working prototypes, designing models to fit the need that is being discussed, using some of our skills within Mesa. Data is a big part of this process. Is not only when you prototype, you're collecting this feedback loop of interviewing a client, designing for the client, collecting feedback, but a lot of it also is often running tests or collecting data in like how it meets the needs of somebody or how it fulfills the needs of somebody. So that's an important part of prototyping. And then just communicating the information, you're communicating it back with the client, you are engaging with your audience, and making this product or whatever the final end result is available to communicating what this prototype is about. In all of these, you are designing solutions. So that's just kind of the key topic there. That's a pretty picture that I thought was all at one time. When we're going through that, the invent, this is just another, just the little letters. And this is why that graphic is just helpful to help have a visual. So these are the steps that we're going to be going through. We're going to be interviewing and empathizing, naming and defining the problem. We're going to be visioning, experimenting, engaging, telling the world or telling our Mesa group, and observing, and then reflecting. Okay, is there any questions so far on the basics of human-centered design? And again, if there are any questions, my goal is to make this session as interactive as possible. So please, feel free to chime in with your microphone Or if you're not able to talk, please utilize your chat box as best as possible. Okay, I'm going to take a few minutes. It is now 1:20. I don't know exactly where you're at in your space, but if you can take about 5 minutes, you are going to need some pen, paper. Again, that document that I opened up or that I shared, it's still in the chat box, and I'll put in the link again. Just to get to this next section, you are going to need to have that document open, the electronic notebook, pen, paper, and get all that information, those materials together. Okay, so we'll be back at 1:25 if you wanted to take a few minutes to gather the materials we're going to need for our next section. So with everybody back, the activity that we're going to work through is we are actually going to be using human-centered design to design a solution for educators. And this is the theme, or not the theme, this is the project for our prepared design for Mesa Day. So again, our theme for Mesa Day is celebrating invention. And within our particular prepared design, the task is to design a solution for educators. And I figured we could go ahead and get a practice, being we have a whole room full of educators. So lots of possible clients here. So that's what we're going to be walking through. I also want to give the disclaimer that we're going to be doing a very modified process of the interview, of the, the recreating, the telling. When you are working with your students, this will take longer. The steps will be more in depth, but the purpose of today is just to walk everyone through those steps and give a chance to actually practice them, and understanding what those I and B and T, and just walking through those different steps. Okay. Excuse me. So with that, we already opened up our workbook. So there should be a copy, or you should have some sort of copy accessible. Now this is also as a note, so on the curriculum page, what was shared out is available. This was one of the links that was supposed to be active, but is no longer active on that page for whatever reason. So and now that you have it saved in your Google Drive, or you can access this recording later as to how to find it, or it's on our Mesa webpage, our website, as a permanent placeholder. But this workbook will be helpful when your students are doing their different projects. So especially if you have, your team working together, this is something that they can share out amongst each other. And so there is a question if the kids are going to be designing a solution for educators. Yes, for the actual competition, the kids will be designing a solution for educators. And this is also just an example. So this is a solution that you guys come up with, your groups will come up with, but this will mimic the process that you work through with your students. So hopefully you're not finding the answers for your students today, but you're walking through the same process that they would for competition. Okay. So this first step that we're going to do is this interviewing and empathizing phase, the I for interviewing. And this is really important when you're doing any kind of human-centered design project. One is identifying your client and who they are. And so the interview phase, although interview sounds really formal, it's a matter of just asking questions and getting to know your client and designing for your client. So asking them, just asking them exploratory questions as to what the needs may be. So the goal of this questioning is to gain an insight into their world. When we go through this process, this is where we're going to spend the most time during this breakout time. There is going to be time to come up with your own questions. We will be dividing into groups. So I do have 6 different breakout rooms. And so once you are put into a breakout room, that'll be your room for the rest of the session. So if you happen to get kicked out and come back in, just remember your room and I'll keep reassigning. I did put all the different rooms. I think I assigned to where each room has at least one Mesa staff member in there, hopefully. Let me just do a double check here. And if there isn't, I think there might be one, and I'll be popping in and out of that room, you know, for assistance with whatever may be needed in there. Okay. So how this is actually going to work is on that notebook. The first thing you're going to do is to come up with some questions. So again, assuming your client is an educator, a fellow teacher, what questions would you ask of a fellow teacher or a fellow educator to try to decide, you know, what kind of product they may need or what kind of prototype they may need? Like some questions would be, you know, like what are the needs of their day? Like as a teacher, maybe what tools could they use? You know, those are the different kinds of questions. If a client isn't even sure what they may need, be like, walk me through your day. Tell me about, you know, yeah, tell me about your school day. Tell me about your classroom setup, things of that nature, to try to, maybe that'll spur up an idea. Over the summer when we did the session, our clients were college students. And I was like, what kind of products do college kids need? They have everything, you know, but we were still able to come up with something that, you know, kind of worked for, you know, what they could need if we were designing something for them, if we were designing something to fit the time. So the same as educators, you were designing something for a fellow teacher. Okay, so on the guidebook there that you have in front of you, take a couple minutes and on your own, before breaking into our breakout groups, maybe think of some initial interview questions that you might ask of a fellow teacher. And did my screen change to the workbook? Okay. Okay. So on here, these are some questions starters. Oh, these were some, I thought I deleted most of them from the other one. But these are some just sample questions that I had came up with from the last one. Like, what are some questions that you could use to interview your client?
I'm sorry, Anita, I think you're on mute.
Thanks, Juanita. I was here talking to myself. I had just made a note about, you know, and I did share the electronic notebook, but as a note, if you do, how you don't have a preference to paper, pen, or, you know, whatever ways for you guys to record, you know, your questions and your group work and whatnot, we will not be actually collecting these workbooks. They're for your use. But I will say that the more completed your workbook is, the more helpful it will be when you actually are going to work with your students later on. So it'll give some examples, you know, best to pull from there. Okay. So
Anita,
go back to
that, just so you know that I know it's hard to see the chat with the share screen, is Laura McNeil from Portales High School wrote, for breakout rooms, her audio and camera are not, she's not using her audio. Okay, I'll just read it to you. My audio and camera do not work on my computer. I'm using an alternate one as I'm teaching with my laptop while I join the Zoom today. So I think you'll have to put her in, when you put her in a breakout room, you need to have 2 devices of hers go into the same room.
Yeah, no, that's not a problem. And then again, just to communicate with each other, if for whatever reason you can't use audio, just make sure to use the chat function with the rest of the people in your group that you're working with. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to actually break out into our rooms. And so once you're in the breakout room, you are going to identify one of you to volunteer to be the client. So whoever's willing to share and to answer questions, excuse me, if one of you in the room can volunteer to be the client, Other roles for the group, and these will be similar to other roles your students will need to have, are the facilitator, who's kind of making sure that things are going. And maybe if helpful, that can be the Mesa staff person in the room. A reporter, someone that's going to come back to the group at the end of the day, because we are going to be sharing out at the end of everything. Somebody to kind of record chat, take notes, somebody to keep a master, and maybe that's the person sharing out to actually keep track of the group's work together. And then just a timekeeper. I'll also be sending out time notices, but those are just important roles for the groups when we break everybody out. Okay, so in your group, this will be the same group that you're going to be working with and going through these different steps. Once I break you guys out, you're going to have 10 minutes to create a list of questions with your teammates. And so whoever's timekeeper, the first 10 minutes is just together sharing out the individual questions that you brainstormed and just coming up with like a list. Like this is the same process that you would work with your students. Like what questions would you want to ask your client? The difference in this being, and this is where we're modifying it for our workshop purposes here, is that in real life, some of this work you would do independently. So say, for instance, you would come up with this list of questions on your own without your client being in the same room with you. But for this purpose, whoever's the client will just kind of, pretend to zone out, be part of the process, but kind of also zone out, in that sense, as far as they're going to be the ones getting something designed for them. But so that is where, again, this is somewhat theoretical in the sense that in real life, this process would look a little bit differently. Also, just to avoid you having to pop in and out of rooms, the next step of this is once you have spent 10 minutes in kind of creating questions for your client, you're going to have 5 minutes then to ask questions of your client, or interview. And it doesn't have to be exactly 10 and exactly 5, but in total, you will have 15 minutes. Like say your question creating process is very fast. Because you guys are very educators and teachers, and you guys will probably be great at that part. So then maybe you can spend the rest of your time actually interviewing your client and getting some answers. So in total, this breakout session is going to last for 15 minutes, and then it'll end it, and then it'll come back here to the main group. Okay. Is there any questions about what will happen in this first breakout session? Okay. Then I am going to go ahead and open up all of the rooms. And you should get a pop-up on your end of the screen. And if for whatever reason you don't get a pop-up, at the bottom of your screen should be breakout rooms. If you just click that, it'll ask you to join your room. Okay, so welcome back everybody from your breakout group. As you guys are coming back, as I know, once you get into the interview portion, I know it's like, oh, I didn't have enough time. That's often the sentiment. Some things to know. And again, you guys are, adults, hopefully, as adults, you do have, more social skills, more communication skills than possibly your students have. So although, maybe the interview process may seem easier for some of us that are in this room, keeping in mind that this could be a really hard thing for your students. This may be one of the first times they've actually actively engaged someone else in an interview. So taking the time to come up with those questions will probably take them a lot longer. And especially if you're working with middle school students, drafting a really good set of questions is going to be really important, because more than likely they're going to ask their client exactly what's on that list of questions. And so, as adults, or as you get older, you do have the, ways to adapt or how to modify questions. But I think students just tend to stick to a script. So those are just some lessons, I guess, that, we've learned along the way. So with that being said, you guys are all come back with interview 1. So what would happen traditionally, say if you were in your Mesa time, is after interview 1, also some things to note is when you are working with a group of students, you might not have the opportunity to have your entire group do the interview, depending upon time, depending upon the client's time. depending upon the scenario. So maybe, for instance, in your group of 4 students, only 1 or 2 could conduct that first interview, and they may have to come back to the group and report. Or, for instance, you have a group of middle school students that they're going to ask exactly the questions, the 10 questions or 15 or however many you laid out. They're going to ask those exact numbers of questions, and then they're going to come back. So even before you start getting into a build, before you start getting into needs, there is still some refining that might have to happen within the interview process. So that's what we're going to do in this next step, is after you've asked your first questions of your client, is as a group, excuse me, you're going to come up with maybe what are some of the main themes, like so what are some of the recurring themes and the answers that you've gotten. Maybe like I was popping in and out of some of the sessions. Maybe it's a need for equipment, need for supplies, need for like what's a recurrent theme or something you hear again and again. What's something you may want to know more about? What are some additional questions, secondary questions that have popped up because of the answers possibly to the first ones? And maybe just trying to dig a little bit deeper about maybe why your client feels a certain way. And you know what, and that's only open, maybe to what your client may want to share with the group. But those are maybe some follow-up questions that you can have based upon the answers to the first group. And so again, we're going to combine 2 steps here. When I break you out into this next time, is you'll have 5 minutes to kind of debrief as a group, like look at the common themes of maybe, if you guys haven't already, this might have been a natural process at the end of the last session, but kind of clump together maybe some of the answers, some of the thematic theme, or some things that have been recurring, like some solutions that may be recurring, and develop some new questions. And then also take the time to answer those new questions for a second interview. Okay, and again, we're doing this in a matter of Zoom time, in a matter of a few minutes, but this in theory, in reality, could take a couple weeks of this refining process of creating questions, meeting with the client, going back to your Mesa group for refining, and then going back for second interview questions. So it could take some time, but we're speeding up, we're rapid questioning here. Is there any questions about what has to happen in this next part? So one question I just saw, so should the second interview be with the same client? Yes, the second interview is with the same client. This is going to be the same client that you're going to have throughout this entire project. So whoever was the client is the client for good. At least for now, for this next hour, it will be the same. Okay, any other questions before we get started?
Are we trying to not generate any specific ideas yet?
Maybe you guys can have ideas. Like, again, I think as an adult way of thinking, I think you already tend to do that. And some students may have that higher level of processing already, but if we're doing it step by step, or, trying to replicate maybe how students possibly think, or, is the step-by-step process is something that at least should be recognized. So even if you naturally go towards, solution, going through those steps will help, especially when you're trying to replicate this process with your students. So you already know what the next step will be, is the solution base. So in the back of your mind, if you're already thinking of solutions, I think that's a natural evolution of thought. But again, when you're working with your kids, that might not be so natural. Okay, any last questions before we release again? Okay, then this time I'm going to go ahead and release into those same groups for 10 minutes. I think everybody, if for whatever, I think there was some that got out and we had to put back in. So if you're not in the same group as before, let me know, but I'll go and open up all the rooms. Okay, so welcome back from your breakout rooms. So after that step, and again, speeding up Zoom lapse time here, that would at least be the first interviews that you would have concluded with your client. And so the next step we're going to go into is we're going to go into the naming and defining the problem. So, and again, just giving caution, I think right away, students, or just in general, I think people want to just zoom and step, go over steps and they right away want to prototype and build backwards. So just that's why all these steps are just really important when you're, especially when you're inventing, but specifically when you're designing with the human-centered design process. Okay, so this next item that we're going to do, and again, if you can imagine this over multiple Mesa times, the next step what you do is you would review your notes within your group. And especially again, if interviews are happening at different times or you need to collect notes from different team members, reviewing your notes with your group. What does the client need? Like after all the interview questions, what is the need that you guys are able to address? What is an actual, so in our case, our question is a solution for an educator. What could that educator need that you could address? And what could solve that problem? Why do they need it? Why is it important? What insights did you find to the teacher? Maybe what surprised you about your client, anything interesting? And again, looking for patterns. If there's something that's recurring that, might have been stressed again and again as a need, that's something that, you definitely want to highlight when you're trying to look for your solution. Okay, so in your notebook, it's on slide 4 to organize what you're going to be doing. Okay. And I guess I can take a poll here. The next step is to go on into problem statements. So we'll just go ahead and do it 10 minutes at a time, even though knowing that you're going to come back, we'll revisit the next portion and then we'll go into the next part. I think the coming back kind of breaks up, the roles, and it kind of mimics, maybe the attention of your students. Like, so making sure to keep this segment, these next 10 minutes on what are the needs of the client. Okay, any questions on this next portion? Okay, then I will go ahead and open the breakout rooms again for another 10 minutes. I'm going to backtrack so I can capture that on the recording. Is the next step of this is that we are going to create a problem statement with your team. So whether the project be for Mesa Day or for Mesa USA, this problem statement is going to be really important. This is going to be the statement that you're going to use in multiple places. This is going to be the one thing that you're going to keep referring to. That, the statement simply put will be, my client needs a way to blank because blank. And that is ultimately when you're working through your project, when you're working through the different steps, is anything you're doing should answer this solution, should go to these next steps. So this next part is we are going to go ahead and work on creating these actual problem statements. I actually did say 10 minutes, but I will, it might be about 7. I'm going to release the groups. And then because we did have to merge, or a lot of people did end up logging off in that last section, I don't want to kick anybody out because then they're not going to be able to jump back in for the later portions of the event. But I will look to merge groups if some of the groups are now small and they want to be merged together. Okay. So with that, let me go ahead and open up this breakout room. And the task for this next section is to create a problem statement. So welcome back, everybody. Now that you guys have come back, you guys should have a problem statement together. We're going to go into this next step of visioning or ideation. And so, especially like if there's different frameworks that are out there on the website, so in the internet, not on the website, but like ideo.org, like they use inspiration, ideation, those are some words that they use, invention, in their curriculum, but it's essentially these same steps. One of the questions that did come up is, how broad of a topic for our competitions. So for our competitions, the concept is solutions for educators. And so the answer to that is educators was intentional to be the wide world of educators. So, the narrow down topic and the constraints for that are just, narrowing it down to the client, to whomever you select as your client who is an educator. So that is as narrowed down as the topic needs to be, hopefully, if that. So, educator in the majority sense, I guess, could mean teacher. but it could be, also other people at a school, thinking about who students would have access to interviewing. But again, you're starting with a really broad topic, selecting a client, narrowing it down to that one specific need for a educator. Does that help answer the question that was presented?
So, anyway, I may have missed something, but so does that mean the students choose one teacher if it's a teacher? Or are they interviewing a bunch of teachers to find out what's a common need?
They're interviewing one. So when you're
Okay.
when you're interviewing for human-centered design, you select one client or a client. In some situations, depending upon it, it could be a group of, so maybe it is like the 5th grade teachers, or, like the science teachers of such and such high school. So in some cases, it could be a group, but it is a group that, if it is a group of people, it would be a shared need amongst that group of people. When they are just researching or investigating, like in that first phase, because they may not have an idea of, and they shouldn't at this point, because you don't want to jump ahead to the prototyping too early. It might be prudent to interview multiple clients, just to see maybe if something sparks an interest amongst one of them. And then from that point, they can narrow down their client. So it could be, to send out lots of feelers. Maybe they could find an idea from different types of educators, like a middle school teacher, a science teacher, different, whatever might be out there. But when you are actually getting down to this stage, you do have the one client. And solutions for educators is only our theme for Mesa Day. The solution, the theme for Mesa USA is designing for equity in your community. But for the sake of the training, we're sticking with the solutions for educators. Okay, and the solution does not necessarily need to focus around education. That was another question that came up. So the solution needs to be focused around education. You're not focusing the idea around, again, say education, you're gearing it towards the client. So the client is the educator. And so whatever their need may be, which might be an educational need, which might not be. So, so again, kind of reframing that to you're focusing it around the client, not necessarily around education, if that makes sense. You're focusing around the educator. Like that's who you need to work on, is the educator. Like the educator's need might be a social need, might be something that has nothing to do with education. They may need a time management system. They might need all these other things that have nothing to do with education to help them do their job as an educator. Does that help narrowing down the topic a little bit? Okay. So in this next step, we're going to go into the visioning portion. And this is where we will actually coming up with the ideation. And so in this aspect, this is where ideas just start flowing. And in this part of the next section, there is no wrong idea. There is no right idea. It's just ideas. And so when your students are creating solutions, and all throughout this entire process, as far as organization goes, I would highly encourage some sort of notebook, like an engineering design notebook or this electronic sketchbook. This is a tool for you to use that you guys are working through, but this doesn't have to be the be all end all. Especially for this next part, it's really important for students to be able to be creative and just to come up with out of the box ideas for a solution. And so in this next step, this is going to be 2-part. Now that you guys as a group came up with a problem statement, you guys know who your client is, you know what those needs are. Now you're going to individually sketch out at least 3 to 5 ideas. These can be wacky, these can be normal, these can be unorthodox, these can be whatever ideas that you have. And again, these are just independently or your own solutions. So when I break out into the breakout, I'm going to release just for logistics, so not going back and forth. I'll release the groups, but the first 5 minutes of the time is going to be spent on individual ideas, just getting ideas from your brain out onto paper. And then from there, after those first 5 minutes are done, then collectively you're going to share out, and you're going to share out and getting some feedback from your team. So, and again, when you're working with students, this process can take a while. As you know, there's, different students may have different opinions on different things. They can, and it's just kind of combining, getting other perspectives, getting different ideas. And this is why you don't want to limit and let one person be in charge of the ideas, because then the whole ideas are just going to come from that one person. So this is the time for sketching and then for share out. Okay. So is there any questions on this next portion and how this works? So I'm going to release for 15 minutes total. The first 5 minutes is individual solutions, drawing out your own. And then the next part is sharing out and getting some feedback, and independently, like creating your pros and cons about your list. Okay. And actually, I just got a time check on myself. To stay on track and for us to release at 3 like we want, I'm actually going to shorten this time. It's 2:46. We're going to jump some steps here. Okay, so we're going to go. So take notes and I'll put them in the chat as you go. The steps that you're going to do when I dismiss into your groups, you're going to individually create ideas, share them out amongst your group. Since you're going to have your client in the room with you, then you're going to share out those ideas with your client. Okay, and then your client would then decide on, and then this is where in the next, we're just going to kind of alter a little bit. Then your client is going to be the one to maybe kind of decide maybe on what idea might work best for them. Okay. So when we break out, and just for time's sake, I think in my brain, I was thinking 3:30, but it does end here at 10. So we'll just spend about 10 minutes total, 10 minutes creating your own ideas, sharing them out, and then having the client select an idea and give feedback and select an idea. Okay, so I'll release and we'll come back in about 10 minutes. Good. Okay, I believe everybody's back now. And so, and sorry for the last check of time. I think all the opening and closing the rooms messed up my Mesa math a little bit. But as we're going forward, the steps that we went through are actually in real life, some of the steps that will take a large amount of time. So, individually, you guys came up with your own sketches, your own ideas. Then collectively, as a group, you shared out your ideas. And then we jumped ahead to, and we're going to kind of bypass this step. In real life, this is where you get into the experimentation part. This is where the kids would have a lot of the fun. They'll get to start really building. You would have supplies on hand. Probably at the beginning, I wouldn't even necessarily start with real supplies, maybe just, like mock supplies, getting them to work through some ideas of their prototype. And in this exercise, again, normally would have the build time. But this would have been, collectively to come up with one group prototype that you decide to build. I just bypassed and let the client make the decision as to what to build in this exercise. So in real life, you would use the client suggestions, and then you would get into actually going forward with a prototype and get to building it. And then from there, that's where you work on that engineering design process. You work on the prototype. Did it work? Yes or no? Re-engage, go back, keep going through those steps. And then, ultimately is always engaging the client feedback. That is that final loop step that should always be a part of building, especially when you're human-centered design, is making sure that you may think you have a great idea. You may think your prototype hits the mark, but if it does not engage the client and if it does not engage client feedback, then you miss the purpose of human-centered design, because you're no longer designing for your client. So that is where you would engage the client feedback and collect that feedback, for use. Like, oh yes, this is amazing. This is awesome. This is wonderful. And that would then become your final prototype based upon the final needs for your client. And the last part is telling the world. I'm going to come back to this because I do want to hear, at least to capture the ideas that your groups came up with. But I am going to close out the projects here. So we will get to this, is, how does this relate to Mesa Day and Mesa USA? We've looped back to the 2 topics for the 2 events. And I think throughout the session, I, tried to highlight where it goes back. At 3:30, we're going to go into our events in detail. So we'll go over like all the details about the different projects, and then you guys can see, how it pairs up and how what you've learned today actually pairs with the logistics of your teams. Okay. These are some tips for when you're helping to pick a client for your students: is connecting to a local experience, the availability of the client. So your student for Mesa Day, for instance, the client is somebody at a school or an educator. So that might be easy to access. For Mesa USA, there might have to be some work involved into helping them find a client. Okay, it's just somebody in their community. Some tips are giving them, setting them expectations, setting up meeting times, meeting with the client's times, working around those things, and preparing ahead of time so that the students go in, say, with the set group of questions. They know exactly what they're going to do when they're supposed to be meeting with that client, etc. And then also, these are just some general considerations, especially when you're designing for somebody. These are just things to always keep in mind. This may be the first time that students have engaged in an interview with somebody else, that they're trying to determine needs for somebody else. Just some things, these are more, than the social learning side of it, is that, just when you're picking a client, we're designing with them. And, they are our client, but you're not necessarily trying to fix anybody. Like say, for instance, if you are designing for somebody with a disability, or you're designing for a need to help them in their daily life, you're designing it with them. The power dynamics, say that they're interviewing their principal. That interview could go very differently, if they're designing something for a principal or maybe a lead teacher. When you're talking about some of these things, and when you're picking a client, hoping that client have time to actually meet with those students, saying, okay, here's your client, but then that client can never get back to them. That's also really hard when you're doing a human-centered design, because that eliminates that possibility for feedback, and that closes up that loop that you never know if really your prototype hit the mark. Okay. And I'm just showing the screen because this will be available for afterwards, but there are a couple of sites that I'll also send, like in an email, of just different curriculums or different guides that'll give you ideas, for different activities. We talked a lot about human-centered design. Both of these just focus on just invention, getting kids to create. So within your Mesa time, some of the first steps that might actually be pretty helpful is just getting them to create things, get some creative mindsets going, and then maybe dive into the human-centered portion, because within Mesa Day, even all the on-site events that we're going to talk about, there's all this invention and creation aspects. So a lot of activities on these 2 sites will be very helpful. Okay, so it is 3 o'clock. Officially, this is the end of the session, but if there is a team member that is willing to stay on from each of the teams, and just so we can capture them, I would like to go ahead and just have quick share outs about the prototypes that your different teams decided. Oh, I zoomed up ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and stop my share now. And if anyone is willing to speak up, or I'll just go in order of the groups. Group 1, possibly.
I can share.
Okay.
So we talked about a lot of issues that that our client Anna was facing, but one that we decided on that was probably most pressing for everybody was just ensuring that students are masked. And when stuff happens, like they're messing with them, or they sneeze, or whatever the reason is that they now don't have a mask, that they don't then have to go miss class time to go to the nurse to get one. But that there's also some kind of accountability in place so that they're not doing this every day. And so we decided on, or our tentative solution was to build a device where students could either press a button, or like maybe at some point down the line, like scan their ID or something that would dispense a mask for them, but would also record like how many they've used. And then after a certain number, like that they get free, maybe the parents start getting billed or something like that. And this would be in the classroom so that students don't have to miss class, and teachers don't have to deal with it. So it doesn't take away from teaching and learning.
I like that. So anyone from group 2? If anyone from group 2 is still on. Okay, group 3.
Yes, I wasn't there for the last part of what they did, but the problem was really around the idea of that technology for Misty and her classrooms or in her classes, is that students' equipment, the technology that they have is slow, and it isn't really matching with the platforms, the software platforms that she wants to be able to use for her online teaching. And the students also prefer to hand in their homework hard copy versus turning it in online. And so the idea was hopefully trying to come up with a solution that could allow students to just like maybe take a quick picture or scan the document in some way that would then convert it into an application, convert it so that it would be able to be uploaded into the application for easy grading for her. But trying to balance both those needs. And that was the last that I kind of had recorded for my group at that time.
That's done. Thank you for sharing. Group 2, you said someone is back. So
Yeah, the group is here and I wanted to report, I was getting my dogs out, so sorry about that. From the interview and all the brainstorming that our group did, the problem statement that we came up with was that Mrs. Lucero needs a way to engage with students in close proximity while staying safe. Unexpectedly, in her world, things are constantly changing and placing layers of limitations on how to approach her teaching. And she's in constant battle, like personally and professionally. And so we came up with an idea of what we started off with like a shield at her desk that she could set up and be able to have kids go up to her and get help. But from that, it developed into a computerized shield where it's also a screen, and she's able to, and then kids also have a shield at their desk that communicates with the teacher shield. And this shield is a board as well. And the Mrs. Lucero is able to select what desk or what shield she wants to communicate with and personalize her lesson for each student. I think that makes sense. And I think I captured everything.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Some futuristic shields there. So group 5, or no, 1, 2, 3, 4, group 4.
So group 4, we were helping a teacher who was having trouble. She wanted more labs and hands-on interactive inquiry-based centers for her kids to do that came with everything, so she wouldn't have to spend a lot of time on it, and things that would really, like when kids got back from quarantine, help them catch up quickly. So we started off just brainstorming some websites and things, resources she could use, but we ended on coming up with a lesson plan to have her kids that are there in class create their own labs that the kids can do when they come back from quarantine. And so we'd have small groups assigned to each specific thing she's teaching, and then having those kids create a hands-on lab that the whole class can do together. So that's basically what we're trying to make it quick.
No, that's good. No, thank you. I know I'm rushing everyone, but group 5. If anyone is on from group 5 by chance? Group 6.
I always talk too much.
Oh.
I was just
No,
going to give somebody else a chance.
Go, Mike. Go.
Hey, ours kind of stemmed from the mask in a way too, because we got to, you can't understand people sometimes with the mask in front of you. And we found, you read lips a lot. And then it also led into us just finding out that, the intercom system doesn't work so well in some schools, and people that are hearing impaired can't hear. So we wanted to come up with a device that would like interpret words and give it the printed view for us so that we could help come out with that. So that's our way we were heading.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, group 5. Group 6. Is anyone still on from group 6?
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Betty.
Okay, okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, I forgot we were group 6. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Do you want to do it, James? Do you
wanna
want
talk
to?
No. No, we're good. I think Betty was our recorder, Denise was our interviewer, Miss Lovato was our client, and Arlene was there to take the data. So yeah, go ahead, guys.
Okay, I'm just so thankful that I'm not teaching right now. They're my heroes anyway, but what we ended up with is that she wanted a way to help with her time, not management so much. I mean, just being able to compress some of the things that she has to do and make it more efficient. She needed time with grading and lesson plans. And so what we came up with is to design a program that will incorporate lesson plans, assignments, auto grading, then transfer those grades into the grading system, whether it be Canvas or whatever, and record those grades. So we thought, well, we need to create an app for that. And that's as far as we got. Well, we kind of defined what it was, but creating the app, we need experts on that. Students.
Now, well, thank you guys. I think all those sounded amazing, and all those came up with creative and pseudo developed within 2 hours of time. So just think about all the great ideas your students will have, and they'll of course have many different perspectives that we all won't have. So with that, this session, I'll go ahead and dismiss it. Thank you all for staying over just a few extra minutes. For those of you that are joining us for the next, we'll be back on at 3:30. So go ahead and log back in at 3:30. So we have a good break between, but we'll see you all soon.